10 Outside the Box Reviews, our week-long look at the monsters of Clive Barker continues. And today, well, let's face it, I'm looking at the one thing I have based on his stuff that isn't Hellraiser. This is the McFarlane Movie Maniacs Wave 4 Candyman figure from Candyman 3, Day of the Dead. Probably the worst of the series, and that's saying something. And I'll go ahead and do my traditional disclaimer right up here, right up front. McFarlane figure, older figure, one of the earliest horror figures out there, Series 4, so it's a little ways into McFarlane's reign, but we have to know what to expect here. It's not going to be a super articulated figure like NECA's done lately. This is old school, very few points of articulation action figure making. But let's take a closer look at Candyman. Like most of the Movie Maniacs line, he comes with his backdrop card. This is kind of the middling version of this. There were a few different ways they did these cards. The original version was this very big, thick display stand. It covered the poster on all sides. It was very durable, very nice looking, but then they trimmed it down. I don't mind this version either. It just has the kind of C shape around the card. The card's decent. The Movie Maniacs logo, the skulls and all that. And down here at the corner it has this removable piece that plugs in, and that actually allows it to stand. It gives it the 3 dimensions needed, which I actually like. Shelf space wise, the other one was very thick. This is a lot thinner and it still stands just fine. It's nicer than what they gave us later, where they started actually giving us just a little tiny base and then the card set on top of the base. It had no frame and no nothing. This is not too bad. Candyman himself here, he looks enough like Tony Todd. It's not a great likeness, but nothing McFarlane ever did was, and it looks enough like Tony Todd, so that's not too bad. The skin tone bugs me a little. It's just very bland, very non-detailed, non-textured, no nothing. It's just this flat brown paint on it. I mean, the sculpt underneath is pretty good, but the fact that it just looks so flat and so just kind of cartoony almost, I just don't like. It's been a problem with mine with a lot of older figures, of just not having the kind of paint detail that we come to expect in figures nowadays. He has a scarf around his neck. He has his large coat here. Soft rubber all the way through. This is missing some detail. You can see the areas up here and around the cuffs. That should be brown and furry. Obviously it has the furry effect going on, but it's not brown at all. Look at the buttons on the coat. The coat's decently sculpted. You could see, we'll get into the gimmick in a minute, but it's very, very large up here in the front. The arms are pretty well done, hard sculpted, kind of awkward poses. This one arm just kind of comes off to the side, and his hook hand is bent at 90 degrees at all times. The hook, I can't say is very durable. I've had mine break many times. You can see the line here where it's cracked. This is also not really what I consider the iconic hook. The first 2 movies had kind of a curved, normal looking hook. This is very V-shaped and not my favorite of the designs. Down here you also have the bloody stump, which is just all blood and no extra detail. I would have liked some more detail down here at the stump. If we open up the coat, and it is soft rubber, so that's pretty easy. We could see his gray undershirt and then everything else, his rib cage, his intestines, and this soft rubbery goo with yellow dots in it, which are supposed to be the bees. Not a great representation of the bees, but it gives you the effect of something being there. Now, it is really weird to me the way they did this, because as I mentioned before, it really sticks out. The front of the coat, when it's closed, really protrudes. And you think they would have been able to sculpt all these details sunken into the character. That would have made sense, as how it is in reality. But instead they had the ribcage and all that popping out like a prosthetic, like in the movie. And I guess maybe that's the idea, to replicate the movie prosthetic, but I just don't think it works that well. If they did it now, it would be a CG thing. It would be sunken into the actor's chest. And when you're doing it in action figure form, you do have to blur the line between what was actually done in the movie and what the intent of the movie makers were. At least that's my opinion. And I think this is a case where you very much needed to go and do what the intent of the effect was to sink it back in. Because also, think about it, with a movie you have camera tricks, you have perspective, you could keep the audience looking at it in a certain way where it doesn't look fake. With an action figure you can look at it from all sides and it kind of messes up the effect. We have his belt buckle and his plain black pants here, decent detail, and then his black shoes. One of my biggest problems with this coat is that you can't ever pose him with it open. It opens up to show all this cool stuff in here, and I do like this. I would have him pose with it open, but it's very hard to get the coat to stay. You can kinda wiggle the arm down here with the hook and try to hook it in there and kinda hold it back a little bit, but it only gets one side of it. The other side, I can never figure out a way to get him to hold it with his other outstretched hand, but it would be cool to have him to be able to stand with the coat wide open. For articulation, he has a swivel at the base of the neck. Unfortunately, it really only works the way I had it before, looking off to the side. It's cut at an angle, so looking forward, he's going to constantly have this head tilt, and I don't think it looks particularly good. He has swivels at the top of both shoulders, and then on both hands he swivels at the wrist cuff, so that furry part is actually what rotates with the hand or hook with it. He does have a waist joint, but mine is very stiff and I'm afraid I'm going to break it if I turn it too much. And then he has a swivel at the ankle. This figure is definitely a sign of its times, a product of the era it came out in, but I want to say still, I think even if I was as into collecting then as I was now and picking these things up, and this was a brand new figure I was reviewing here, I think I'd still give it a not recommend. The idea is okay. I like that this figure exists. I mean, who else has ever made a Candyman figure? This is it. But they picked a really weird movie to base it off of. I guess probably at the time, being the most recent movie, maybe it seemed a little more topical than to go back to the early 90s. But really the only difference is the hook, and quite honestly, you already gave him the bead chest, which I don't remember if that really came into play in part 3, so you might as well just gone full out and made the original Candyman here. Some brown paint on the coat would have gone a long way just to add in that look of the fur. I mean, they could have used the same brown they used for his skin tone. It probably still would have looked a little nicer. Maybe not. It actually could have looked really bad now that I think about it. The head sculpt was okay for the time. The articulation, even for the time, was still pretty bad. Not that I expected more of it to be on the figure, but it really actually comes down to the poses he's stuck in. You can't get him really doing anything menacing with the hook. You can't get him to hold the jacket open. It's just a lot of nothing you could do with him. It's one pose and one pose only, and it's not that good of a pose. And as I said before, sinking the rib cage back into the figure and not having it protrude so much would have been really nice. So not recommend. But if you absolutely have to have a Candyman figure, well, you don't have much other choice, so you'll probably end up with this guy. Make sure you check out Outside the Box Reviews on Facebook. There'll be a link below. Also check out Outside the Box Reviews on Instagram, username Outside the Box Reviews. And until next time, stay tuned for the rest of the week as we continue to look at figures based on Clive Barker works, and throughout the rest of October as we look at more horror figures.